A special Christmas was just around the corner. My fiancé is moving in with us, my son Parker announced during Christmas dinner. You'll adjust. I always do, Lillian said with a smile aimed directly at me. Her smile was as cold as the December wind lashing against the windows of our home. But it vanished when I smiled. I took a document from my purse and said, "Well, I have news too." The silence cut the air like a knife. The Christmas tree lights flickered, but there was no magic left at this table, only tension. Parker looked at me, bewildered, a piece of ham halfway to his mouth. Lillian furrowed her brow, losing for the first time the facade of sweetness she wore in the presence of others. "What news, Mom?" my son asked, using the voice he'd used as a child when he knew he'd done something wrong. I remembered that same tone when, at 8 years old, he'd broken his grandmother's vase. But Parker was no longer the wide-eyed boy who ran into my arms when he had nightmares. Now he was a 35-year-old man who had forgotten his mother's sacrifices. He had forgotten the nights I worked as a seamstress until my fingers bled, just to pay for his college education. He had forgotten how I sold my wedding rings to buy him his first bicycle. The memories hit me like angry waves. Parker, sleeping on my chest, his tiny fingers like petals clinging to my blouse when thunder scared him, the scent of his hair freshly washed with chamomile shampoo, his laughter that filled every corner of this house I had built with so much love. Parker had always told me I was his hero. I whispered more to myself than to them, that he would take care of me when he grew up, just as I had taken care of him. Lillian gave a dry laugh. "Well, Nora, children say a lot. Adults have other obligations." Obligations? The word struck me like a poisoned arrow. What were my obligations now? To live in the shadows in my own home. To pretend not to see her checking my retirement statements every month. To pretend it didn't hurt when she treated me like a burden. "Mom." "Lillian's right," Parker said. Those 3 words pierced me like dagger thrusts. "We need privacy. We're a young couple. You understand, right?" Understand. I was always expected to understand when he was late because he was with her, to understand when he cancelled our Sunday dinner, to understand when he no longer called me Mom, but Nora, as if we were strangers. "Yes, I understand," I replied with a smile that cost me all my strength. "I understand more than you think." The document in my hands felt heavy, but not as heavy as the humiliations I had silently endured for months. Since Lillian had stormed into our lives, everything had changed. First, there were subtle comments about my age, about my old-fashioned cooking, about how my presence disturbed their friends when they visited. Then came the unwritten rules. I couldn't watch my favorite show in the living room anymore because they needed their own space. My favorite armchair, where I had nursed Parker and where his father had embraced me on cold nights, suddenly became forbidden territory. "The new couch doesn't match the old armchair, Nora," Lillian had said with the false sweetness she mastered so perfectly. "Don't you think it would be better to donate it?" Donate it, as if my memories were trash getting in the way of their new decor, as if 40 years of history could simply be bagged up and handed to the first needy person at the doorstep. But I stayed silent as I always did, as the women of my generation had learned to, be silent, smile, nod, adapt, always adapt, until today. "Well," I said, slowly rising from the table, feeling all eyes on me. "I think it's time you heard my news." The document crackled in my fingers. 69 years of life had taught me that sometimes silence means survival, but sometimes silence is also surrender, and I was no longer willing to surrender. "I deserve more than this," those words echoed in my head like a silent mantra as I looked at their expectant faces. Lillian tapped her perfectly manicured nails on the table, a gesture I recognized as a sign of her impatience. Parker fidgeted uncomfortably in his chair, waiting for me to say something reassuring, something that would confirm I would remain the obedient, silent mother I'd always been. But my memories carried me to another time, when this table was filled with genuine laughter and unconditional love, when Parker was 5 years old and woke me at 6 a.m. just to tell me he'd dreamed of dragons, but I had saved him with my superhero cape. "What's your superpower, Mom?" He had asked me that distant morning, with those sparkling eyes that now avoided mine. "My superpower is loving you more than my own life," I had replied, kissing his sweaty forehead after the nightmare, wondering how much things had changed. Now my love seemed to be a burden, an obstacle to their new perfect life with Lillian, a woman who had only stormed into our lives 2 years ago but had already achieved what no earthquake could, to shake the foundations of our family. Nora, are you going to keep being dramatic or tell us what you're holding? Lillian interrupted, with the thinly veiled impatience that characterized her when she wasn't the center of attention. Lillian, please, Parker murmured, but without much conviction. He didn't even defend my right to take my time anymore. He didn't even pretend to respect the woman who had given birth to him. All right, I finally said, unfolding the document with deliberately slow movements. This paper is a property deed. A property deed for what? Parker asked with the voice he used when he sensed trouble at work. A document that proves this house alone. It's not, as you thought, jointly owned. It belongs to me, and me alone. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock that had belonged to my mother-in-law. The same clock Lillian wanted to modernize because its ticking disturbed her at night. That's impossible, Lillian said with a voice that had lost all sweetness. This house belonged to your parents. Parker is your only heir. Legally, he has a claim to this property. Legally, I repeated, savoring the word. I have been the sole owner of this house for 30 years. When my husband died, I had to sort out many legal matters you never asked about. The house was in my parents' name. That's true. But when they died, they bequeathed it to me, not their grandson. Parker looked at me as if I were a stranger. Mom, why did you never tell me? Because it was never relevant, I replied honestly. I never thought I would have to remind my own son that this house is my home, not a temporary favor I'm doing for you. The truth was, I had kept this information like an ace up my sleeve, without consciously knowing I would need it one day. When my lawyer explained all the legal details to me after my parents' death, I had kept these documents in my personal safe, believing it was information I would never need. How wrong I was. During those months of humiliation, I had started taking out these papers at night, reading them again and again, reminding myself that I still had power, that I still had options, that I wasn't completely defenseless. Last week, when Camila found me crying in the yard, I had told her everything. I had shown her the documents, explained my legal situation. Nora, she had said firmly, you have all the cards in your hand. Why are you still playing as if you're the loser? She was right. I had played the victim, even though in reality, I held the power. I had allowed them to treat me like a guest in my own home, even though I was the owner. I had accepted crumbs of respect, even though I deserved to be treated like the queen of my own castle. But there's more, I continued, watching Lillian clench her fists. I also have documents proving that my retirement funds were managed without my full consent. What do you mean by that? Parker asked, his voice growing quieter. I mean that over the past 6 months, I've reviewed all the activity on my bank account and found some very interesting things. Lillian's face had lost all color. Finally, I had found something that scared her more than the prospect of having to find a new place to live. Mom, I think you're exaggerating, Parker tried to say, but his voice sounded uncertain. Exaggerating? I'm exaggerating when I say you spent my money on things I didn't authorize. I'm exaggerating when I say you made me a stranger in my own home. I'm exaggerating when I say I had to ask permission for months to use my own living room, to cook in my own kitchen, to invite my friends into my own house. I continued, feeling each word release years of pent-up frustration. I'm exaggerating when I say you treated me like an annoying burden that had to be tolerated. Lillian finally found her voice, but it was no longer the melodic tone she used for manipulation. It was raw, desperate. Nora, I think you're misunderstanding things. We were just trying to help you, to make your life easier. Help me. I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the bitter laugh of someone who finally sees the truth clearly. You helped me when you suggested donating the armchair where I nursed my son. You helped me when you decided I could no longer use the master bathroom because I don't have that many toiletries. Parker fidgeted uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the boy he used to be, the boy who knew when something wasn't right. Mom, perhaps there were misunderstandings, he tried to say, but I cut him off. There were no misunderstandings, Parker. There was a systematic campaign to make me feel superfluous in my own life. There was a deliberate plan to turn me into a shadow, creeping through the corners. Memories stormed into my head like an avalanche. I remembered the time Lillian invited her friends over for lunch without telling me. And when I came home, she had said in front of everyone, "Nora, could you have lunch in your room today? We're having a young adults conversation." A young adults conversation. As if at 69, I had lost the ability for intelligent conversation, as if my age were contagious and could spoil their youthful fun. I also remembered the morning I found all my plants in the yard uprooted and replaced with more modern ones. It was a surprise, Lillian had explained. Those plants were so old. These ones give the yard a fresher feel. My plants, the roses I had planted when Parker turned 10, the hydrangeas named after me and a gift from my husband for our 20th wedding anniversary, the jasmine that scented the summer nights and reminded me of my mother. All torn out and thrown away like trash. But the most painful memory of all was from last month, when my cousin Audrey from Chicago came to visit. We hadn't seen each other in 5 years, and I was so looking forward to receiving a beloved relative. "Who is this lady?" Lillian had asked Parker, when Audrey knocked on the door, as if I didn't exist to answer for myself. "That's my cousin," Parker had explained. "She comes by now and then." "Oh," Lillian had replied with that false smile. "Nora, could you receive her in the hallway? We just cleaned the living room today, and we don't want it to get dirty." The hallway? As if my cousin were a peddler, as if a 70-year-old woman who had traveled 4 hours by bus to see me deserved to be received between brooms and buckets, and I had obeyed. I had brought Audrey into the hallway. I had served the coffee in chipped mugs, because the good ones were reserved for special occasions. And I had pretended everything was fine when she asked why we couldn't sit comfortably in the living room. "She got used to giving you orders very quickly," Audrey had observed before she left. "And you got used to obeying very quickly." Those words had haunted me for weeks. When had I stopped being the mistress of my own life? When had I relinquished my power to a woman who could have been my daughter, and who treated me worse than I would have treated a housekeeper? "Nora," Lillian said now, trying to regain her sweet tone, but her voice trembled. "I think you're exaggerating things. We love you very much." "You love me?" I asked, and for the first time in months, my voice sounded firm and sure. "Is that how you show love, by making a 69-year-old woman feel like a stranger in her own home?" "Mom, please," Parker pleaded, but I was no longer willing to listen to pleas. "No, Parker, this time you're going to listen to me. For 33 years since your birth, I have put your needs before my own. I sacrificed my dreams, my comfort, my future to ensure you had everything you needed." My voice cracked slightly as I remembered all the sacrifices I had made without hesitation. The nights I worked late to pay for his English lessons. The clothes I didn't buy for myself so I could buy him new shoes. The vacations I never took to save for his education. I never asked for anything in return, I continued, because I thought love didn't need accounts. I thought when the time came that I needed care and companionship, you would naturally be there for me, just as I was for you. Lillian looked at me with poorly concealed hatred. There was no trace left of the sweet woman she pretended to be in public. Her true colors were finally showing. But I was wrong, I admitted, feeling each word free me from years of unfulfilled expectations. I was wrong to think love was automatic, that respect was inherited, that gratitude was lasting. Parker lowered his gaze. For the first time in months, he seemed ashamed of his behavior. "In these months," I continued, "I have learned that boundless love turns into contempt, that unconditional generosity transforms into entitlement, that endless patience is interpreted as weakness." Camila had told me something similar last week when she caught me rearranging my belongings in the small room. "Nora, if someone treats you badly and you don't set boundaries, you're teaching them that it's okay to treat you badly." "But not anymore," I declared, feeling my spine straighten with every word. "I will no longer be the invisible grandmother hiding in the corners. I will no longer be the annoying mother-in-law who has to ask permission to exist in her own home." The document was still in my hands, but it no longer trembled. Now it felt like what it truly was. My letter of freedom. "My news," I said, looking Lillian directly in the eyes, is that you have exactly 30 days to find somewhere else to live. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the grandfather clock seemed to have stopped ticking. What did you say? Lillian asked with a voice so sharp it sounded like a gull's cry. Her facade of sweetness had finally completely shattered, revealing the calculating woman she had always been. You said you would adjust, I replied with a calm that surprised even me. You said you always adjust. Well, now it's your turn to adjust and find a new home. Parker looked at me as if I were a stranger. Mom, you can't be serious. This is our home too. No, Parker, this was never your home. This is my home. And in all these months, you've made it very clear that I am not welcome in my own home. Lillian abruptly stood up, knocking over her chair. This is ridiculous. You can't just kick us out like that. We have rights. Rights, I repeated, and for the first time in months, I smiled genuinely. Which rights? The right to humiliate me in my own home, the right to make me feel like a burden, the right to spend my money without my permission. We never used your money without permission. Lillian shrieked, but her voice sounded desperate. I took another paper from my purse. Oh, really? And what's this? I unfolded the bank statement I had requested last week. $700 for home improvements I never authorized. $500 for a dinner at a restaurant I never visited. $250 for clothes I never saw. Lillian's face turned ashen. Parker looked at her with genuine surprise. Lillian, is this true? My son asked with a voice I didn't recognize. I thought she never said anything, Lillian stammered, completely losing her composure. Because I was taught to say nothing, I explained, feeling each word give me back a piece of my lost dignity. You convinced me that I was a burden, that I should be grateful for the privilege of living in my own home. Memories stormed over me again. I remembered the afternoon I came back from buying my medication and caught Lillian using my credit card to buy clothes online. When I asked her what she was doing, she had replied, "Oh, Nora, I'm just buying a few necessary little things for the house. You don't understand these modern things." Necessary little things. A $200 dress was a necessary little thing for the house. I also remembered when I discovered they had used my account to pay for their fancy dinners. We work so much, Lillian had explained when I finally gathered the courage to ask her. We need to relax now and then. Besides, what are you going to do with so much money at your age? At my age? It always came back to my age, as if growing older was a crime that deserved punishment. But most importantly, I continued, feeling my voice grow stronger with each revelation, is that I have explored my legal options. I pulled a business card from my purse. I met with an attorney specializing in elder law. It turns out what you've done has a name: elder financial and emotional abuse. Lillian sank into her chair as if all her bones had been removed. Nora, please. This is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I interrupted her. Is it a misunderstanding when you forbade me to use my own living room? Is it a misunderstanding when you made me feel like I had to ask permission to cook in my own kitchen? Parker finally spoke, his voice almost inaudible. Mom, I didn't know this. I thought you were okay with everything. Okay with it? I looked him directly in the eyes. The same eyes that once looked at me with so much love and admiration. When did you ask me if I was okay with it? When did you ask me before you rearranged my house? When did you ask for my opinion before you changed all my routines? Parker's silence was more bitter than any answer. He knew I was right. He knew they had made decisions about my life without involving me, as if I were a child incapable of making my own choices. During those months of humiliation, I had found solace in my conversations with Camila. My neighbor had become my confidant, the only person who seemed to remember that I was still a human being with feelings and rights. You know what the saddest thing about all this is? I had asked Camila just 2 days ago, as we drank coffee in her kitchen. It's not that they treat me badly. It's that my own son has forgotten who I am. He hasn't forgotten you, Camila had replied with that wisdom that only years can bring. He's simply chosen not to see you. That's a difference. What difference? Forgetting is involuntary, not seeing is a choice. Those words hit me like lightning. Parker hadn't forgotten all the sacrifices I had made for him. He had chosen not to see them. He hadn't forgotten the unconditional love I had given him for 33 years. He had decided it no longer mattered. Camila's right, I mumbled now, more to myself than to them. Who's Camila? Lillian asked suspiciously. Camila is my neighbor, the woman who reminded me that I have a right to be treated with dignity in my own home. You've been talking about us to strangers? Lillian asked, filled with feigned indignation. I spoke to a friend about my situation, I corrected firmly. Because you made me a stranger in my own family, so I had to seek understanding elsewhere. Camila had been more than a friend. She was my emotional lifeline. Every afternoon, when the loneliness and humiliation became unbearable, I jumped over the low fence separating our yards and sought refuge in her kitchen, where coffee was always ready and encouraging words were never absent. Nora, Camila had told me last week, you have two choices. You can continue to be a victim of your own goodness, or you can remember that you are the woman who raised a son alone, who worked double shifts for years, who built a dignified life with her own hands. But he's my son, I had replied through tears. He's all I have left. Exactly why you can't let him treat you like nothing. If you don't respect yourself, how can you teach him to respect you? Those words were the catalyst I needed. That same afternoon, I had gone to the bank, requested all my bank statements, and begun to document every instance of abuse, every humiliation, every time they had used my money without permission. I had also visited the attorney Camila recommended, a young but understanding man who specialized in elder abuse cases. Miss Sawyer, he had said after reviewing all my documents, you have every advantage on your side. This house legally belongs to you. Your retirement funds are untouchable, and what they've done is financial and emotional abuse. For the first time in months, I had felt hope. The attorney explained something very interesting to me, I continued, watching them both tense up at the mention of legal advice. He told me that we elderly people often become victims of abuse by our own family members, and that most of the time we don't fight back because we think it's normal, part of the respect we should show younger generations. Lillian tried to interrupt me, but I raised my hand to silence her. For the first time in months, I would finish my sentence without interruption. But it's not normal, I declared with a strength I didn't know I still possessed. It's not normal for me to become an unpaid housekeeper in my own home. It's not normal for them to have access to my money without my express consent. It's not normal for them to treat me as if I were an old piece of furniture in the way. Parker finally found his voice, but it sounded small and defeated. Mom, we never meant to hurt you. But you did, I cut him off. And what's worse, you did it consciously. Every time she suggested I not use the living room because they needed privacy, they knew they were excluding me. Every time they made decisions about my house without asking me, they knew they were treating me disrespectfully. Memories from the past few weeks rushed over me. I remembered the conversation I had with Camila just 3 days ago, when I finally found the courage to tell her the whole truth about my financial situation. Camila, I had confessed to her, crying in her kitchen. I think I'm going crazy. Sometimes I wonder if I really am as annoying as they say, if I really am such a huge burden. Nora, Camila had replied with firmness. That's exactly what they want you to think. If someone makes you doubt your own reality, they're trying to control you. But what can I do? He's my son, Camila. He's all I have. Exactly why you can't let him treat you like nothing. If you don't respect yourself, how can you teach him to respect you? Those words had been like a splash of cold water. They had helped me see that my maternal love didn't have to equate to silent suffering. In these months, I continued, looking alternately at Parker and Lillian, I've learned something I should have learned a long time ago. I've learned that true love doesn't accept humiliations, that respect isn't begged for but demanded, that dignity is non-negotiable. Lillian straightened in her chair, trying to regain some of her lost authority. Nora, I think you're being very dramatic. We all live together. We all have to adjust. Adjust. I exploded, feeling all the pent-up rage finally find an outlet. I was the only one who adjusted. I adjusted to eating in the small room when you had guests. I adjusted to not watching my favorite show because the noise bothered you. I adjusted to sneaking around my own home like a thief. My voice had grown louder than I intended. But I didn't care. I had held back these words for too long. I adjusted to you using my money as if it were a joint account. I adjusted to you treating me like a ghost. I adjusted to my own son talking to me as if I were an annoying stranger. Parker buried his face in his hands. For the first time since Lillian had entered our lives, he seemed truly ashamed. But I won't adjust anymore, I declared, feeling each word give me back a piece of my lost soul. Now it's your turn to adjust to the consequences of your actions. I took another paper from my purse. This is a legal document prohibiting any access to my bank accounts without my physical presence and my handwritten signature. As of tomorrow, my credit card will be cancelled and replaced with a new one that only I will know about. Lillian turned even paler. Nora, that's normal, logical, what I should have done from the beginning, I completed. I remembered the shame I had felt when the bank representative explained all the unauthorized activity on my account. Miss Sawyer, he had said with genuine concern, are you aware of all these expenditures? Because some of them are questionable. Questionable. An upscale restaurant I had never been to. A boutique where I had never shopped. A spa I was never allowed to enter because it wasn't my world. And there's more, I continued, enjoying the look of growing panic on Lillian's face. Tomorrow, a locksmith is coming to change all the locks on the house. You can't do that. Lillian shrieked, completely losing her composure. I can and I will. This is my house, and I decide who has access to it. Parker finally lifted his head. His eyes were red, but I didn't know if it was shame or rage. Mom, please, can we discuss this like adults? Like adults. I repeated, savoring the irony. Parker, I tried to talk to you like an adult for months. Every time I tried to express my discomfort about the changes in the house, you said I wasn't adjusting well. Every time I tried to talk about the use of my money, you said I wouldn't understand modern needs. It was true. I had tried to communicate with him on several occasions, but I was always met with excuses, downplaying, or plain ignorance. I particularly remembered a conversation we had 2 months ago, when I had finally found the courage to tell him that I felt uncomfortable with all the changes in the house. Mom, he had replied with that condescending patience one has for small children. I understand that changes are difficult at your age, but you have to trust us. We know what's best for everyone. At my age, they knew what was best, as if at 69, I had lost the ability to know what was good for myself. But now, I continued with firmness, the rules have changed. I will no longer allow you to make decisions about my life without involving me. I will no longer pretend to agree with things that hurt me. Camila had given me the courage to stand up for myself. Nora, she had said the night before, tomorrow you will reclaim your life. You will remind everyone, including yourself, who you truly are. And she was right. In all these months, I had lost sight of who I was. I had become a caricature of myself, the submissive old woman who had to be grateful for the crumbs of attention she was given. But I wasn't that woman. I was Nora Sawyer, the woman who had worked double shifts to raise her son. The woman who had faced widowhood with dignity and strength. The woman who had built a successful life with her own hands. It was time for that woman to come back. Nora, please, let's be reasonable, Lillian said, trying to regain her sweet tone, but her voice trembled. We're a family. Families solve their problems by talking to each other, not by throwing people out on the street. Family, I looked her directly in the eyes, and for the first time in months, I didn't avert my gaze. Lillian, families care for each other, families respect each other, families don't steal and humiliate. Parker fidgeted nervously in his chair. Mom, maybe we can reach an agreement. The only possible agreement, I interrupted him with a firmness that surprised me, is that you find somewhere else to live. 30 days is more than generous, considering how you've treated me. Lillian abruptly stood up. Her face was contorted with rage. This is ridiculous. You can't just kick us out like that. Parker, say something. But Parker remained silent, looking at his hands as if the answers he couldn't find were written there. During those months of humiliation, I had dreamed of this moment. I had imagined 1,000 times what it would feel like to regain my power, my voice, my dignity, but I never thought it would feel so liberating. You know what the saddest thing about all this is, Parker? I asked with a softer voice, filled with melancholy. It's not that you've disappointed me. It's that you've disappointed yourself. He looked up, and for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who promised to always take care of me. You were the boy who defended me when the other parents at school whispered about the single mother. You were the teenager who hugged me when I came home exhausted from work and told me I was the best mom in the world. My voice cracked slightly as I remembered those moments of pure connection, when we were an unbeatable team against the world. You were the young man who swore to me that I would always be a part of his own family. Not a burden, not a nuisance, but a part of it. Parker closed his eyes, as if my words were too painful to hear. But that young man is gone, I continued, feeling tears threaten to escape. But I stood firm. And in his place, there's a man who allows his mother to be mistreated, who closes his eyes when money is stolen from her bank account, who pretends not to see her become a stranger in her own home. Mom, stop, Parker murmured, but his voice sounded broken. No, I won't stop, because for months you demanded that I stop feeling, stop having an opinion, stop existing with dignity. Now you will listen. Lillian tried to interrupt me again, but I stopped her with a look that could cut glass. And you? I turned directly to her. You came into this house as a guest. I welcomed you with love. I opened the doors of my home to you. I treated you like the daughter I never had. I vividly remembered the first few months of her relationship with Parker, how I had tried to build a bond with her, how I had shared family recipes with her, how I had given her my mother's pearl necklace for her birthday. I gave you my trust, my affection, my respect, and you took all of it and trampled it underfoot as if it were trash. Nora, I would never, Lillian began to say, but I cut her off. You would never what? Never tell me my habits are old-fashioned? Never imply my friends are too old to visit? Never make me feel like an annoying relic that has to be tolerated? Each question was a slap of reality. Each word a truth I had buried for too long. You came with a mission to erase me, I declared with crystal clear clarity, to turn my son into someone who no longer recognized me, to appropriate my life, my home, my money, my place in this world. The words came out of my mouth as if they had been waiting for years to be spoken. But you were wrong about one very important thing, I continued, feeling my spine straighten further with each word. You were wrong when you thought I was weak. Camila had told me something similar last week. Nora, they mistook your kindness for weakness, your patience for subservience, your unconditional love for foolishness. I am not weak, I repeated, more to myself than to them. I am a woman who raised a son alone after his father died. I am a woman who worked 2 jobs for years to secure her family's future. I am a woman who built this house, this life, this stability with her own hands. Parker looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time in years. And perhaps he was. I am a woman who deserves respect, I declared. And those 5 words echoed through the room like a battle cry, deserving to be consulted on decisions that concern her life, deserving control over her own money, deserving to be treated with dignity in her own home. Lillian had lost all composure. Her eyes gleamed with a mixture of rage and panic. This is abuse. You can't put us out on the street. Abuse. I laughed. But it wasn't a joyful laugh. It was the laugh of someone who finally saw the ultimate irony of the situation. Lillian, for months, you were the one committing abuse. Emotional abuse, financial abuse, psychological abuse. I took my cell phone from my pocket. In fact, I've recorded several of our conversations from the past few weeks here. Conversations in which you humiliated me, demeaned me, treated me as if I were incompetent. Her eyes widened in horror. That's illegal. No, Lillian, it's perfectly legal to record conversations in my own home to protect myself from abuse. My attorney confirmed that to me. It was true. After consulting with the elder law attorney, I had started documenting everything. Every condescending comment, every humiliation, every moment they treated me like a ghost. I have evidence of everything, I continued, feeling power settle onto my hands like a perfect glove, from the unauthorized expenditures, from the constant humiliations, from the isolation you subjected me to. Parker finally spoke, his voice almost inaudible. Mom, did you really record our conversations? I recorded my own defense, I corrected, because no one else would. In these weeks of preparation, I had learned things about myself I didn't know existed. I had learned that I was stronger than I thought, smarter than they wanted me to believe, more valuable than they wanted me to feel. 30 days, I repeated, returning to the core of the entire conversation. 30 days for you to find somewhere else to live. 30 days to learn what it means to fend for yourselves without using an elderly woman's money. But Mom, Parker tried to plead one last time, where are we supposed to go? We don't have any savings for a move. You should have thought of that before you spent my money on expensive restaurants and designer clothes, I replied without a shred of sympathy. For the first time in months, I felt no guilt in putting myself first. I didn't feel the need to save my son from the consequences of his own choices. Besides, I continued, feeling a strange calm fill my chest. It's not my responsibility to solve the problems you created yourselves. For 35 years, it was my responsibility to take care of Parker. That responsibility ended when he decided his mother was expendable. The words sounded harsh, but they were true. And for the first time in months, the truth didn't scare me. Nora, please, Lillian tried again, but now her voice had lost all semblance of sweetness. We're young people. We need time to get organized. Young people, I repeated, savoring the words. Yes, you're young enough to work, to save, to take responsibility for your own lives. Young enough to think about your future before you stake everything on my endless generosity. Parker abruptly stood up and went to the window. I can't believe you're doing this, Mom. After everything we've been through together. After everything we've been through, I also stood up, feeling indignation give me strength. Parker, look me in the eyes and tell me, when was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you asked me how I was, what I needed, what I thought? He continued to stare out the window, unable to answer. When was the last time you hugged me when it wasn't my birthday or Christmas? When was the last time you sat down with me for coffee and told me about your day? Silence spread between us like an abyss that had gradually formed. Lost conversation by lost conversation, denied hug by denied hug. In these months, I continued with a softer, but no less firm voice, I had more meaningful conversations with Camila, my neighbor, than with you in the entire last year. It was painfully true. Camila had become my confidant, my emotional support, the family I had lost under my own roof. Camila asks me how I slept. She asks me if I need anything from the grocery store. She asks me what I think about the news, about the weather, about life. She treats me as if my opinions matter. I remembered the conversation we had just yesterday, when Camila had helped me rehearse this confrontation. Nora, she had said, as we practiced in her living room. When you tell them all this, they'll try to guilt-trip you. They'll remind you of all the good times in the past. They'll promise you things will change. And if they promise to change? I had asked with genuine uncertainty. Then you'll remind them that they had months to change on their own will and chose not to. The change that comes after a confrontation is not genuine change. It's survival. Those words echoed in my head now as I looked at the desperate faces of Parker and Lillian. Listen, Mom, Parker finally said, turning to me. I know we made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can be a family again. Mistakes. I repeated, feeling the word trivialized months of suffering. Parker, those weren't mistakes. Those were conscious and sustained decisions to treat me like a second-class citizen. Lillian went to him and took his arm. Parker, tell her she can't do this. Tell her we're her only relatives. But I was no longer the same woman who had sat at the table an hour earlier. That woman was desperate to keep her family together at any cost. That woman had learned that self-love is not selfishness. Lillian, I said with a calm that surprised me. Your only concern is that your gravy train has disappeared. You're not worried about my well-being. You're worried about your comfort. Her eyes filled with tears, but they no longer moved me. I had seen too many fake tears in the past few months. All this time, I continued. You made me believe I was lucky to have you in my life, that I should be grateful for your presence, your care, your company. I walked into the living room to the armchair they had forced me to donate, the armchair where I had nursed Parker, where I had cried over my husband's death, where I had read thousands of bedtime stories. But now I understand that you were the lucky ones. You lived in a beautiful house for free. You spent money you hadn't earned. You had an unpaid housekeeper who cooked, cleaned, and kept silent when she was mistreated. Parker followed me into the living room. Mom, you were never our employee. No, then what would you call someone who cooks for others, cleans for others, and isn't allowed to use the common areas of the house he lives in? He had no answer for that. Someone who has to ask permission to invite guests, who isn't allowed to watch TV in the living room, who has to hide when the homeowner's friends come over. Each word was a nail in the coffin, but it was necessary. It was time for truths, not comforting lies. But that's over now, I declared, feeling my spine straighten with regained pride, because I remembered who I am. I took the last document from my purse. This paper is a restraining order. If, after the 30-day deadline, you attempt to return to this house without my permission, or if you try to intimidate or pressure me in any way, you will be arrested. Lillian sank onto the couch, completely defeated. You can't be serious. I'm more serious about this than anything in my life. For years I learned many things, but the most important lesson I learned in recent months is that love without respect is disguised abuse. Camila had helped me come to this realization. Nora, she had said, true love never demands that you sacrifice your dignity. True love never demands that you become invisible. You mistook my love for weakness, I continued, looking alternately at the two of them. You mistook my patience for foolishness. You mistook my generosity for obligation. Parker approached me, tears in his eyes. Mom, please. You're all I have. No, I stopped him before he could touch me. You were all I had, and you decided it wasn't enough. You decided you needed something more important than your mother's love. Tears ran down his cheeks, but they no longer moved me as they once did. I had cried too many lonely tears in my small room for his to make me change my mind. You needed a free house, easy money, and a housekeeper who didn't ask for a salary, I continued with necessary harshness. Well, you got all that. Now it's time you learned to get it for yourselves. 30 days, I repeated for the last time, returning to my seat at the table where everything had begun. January 19th. I want this house free of your belongings and your presence. Lillian stood up, her eyes filled with pure hatred. You'll regret this, Nora, you'll be alone, and when you're old and sick, you'll have no one to take care of you. I'm already old, I replied with a calm smile that surprised even me. And I'm already alone. The difference is, now it's my own choice. Her words, which would have broken my heart months ago, now bounced off me like raindrops on glass. She had no power over me anymore. Families forgive. Families also respect each other, I interrupted him with final determination, and you chose not to respect me. Now I choose not to allow it anymore. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The cool air of the Christmas night flowed into the house, carrying away the toxic atmosphere that had dominated my home for months. Dinner is over, I announced. And so is this conversation. Lillian left first, muttering curses that meant nothing to me anymore. Parker paused at the threshold and turned to me one last time. Mom, do you really mean this? Do you really want to destroy our family? No, Parker, I replied with a sadness that was no longer despair, but acceptance. I didn't destroy our family. You destroyed it when you decided I didn't deserve respect. I'm just picking up the pieces of my dignity. He left in silence, and I closed the door behind him. For the first time in months, the sound of the lock didn't imprison me. It protected me like the queen of my own castle. I stood in my living room. I breathed in the silence, which no longer felt empty, but full of possibilities. I went to the window and watched them walk to their car, arguing fiercely. That was no longer my problem. The phone rang. It was Camila. "How did it go, warrior?" she asked me, her voice full of the genuine affection I had missed so much. "It was liberating," I replied, surprised by how true it sounded. "I am no longer the victim of my own goodness." "And how do you feel?" I took a moment to truly assess how I felt. I feel like Nora Sawyer again, like the woman who raised a son alone, like the woman who built a dignified life with her own hands. "That's my friend." Camila laughed. "Should I come over to keep you company?" "No," I replied, and this time, loneliness didn't scare me. "I want to be alone with myself. We have a lot to discuss." After hanging up, I walked through my entire house, rediscovering it. I returned to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. The coffee I liked, not the one Lillian bought because it was more modern. I sat down at the dining table in my place, the head of the table, which had been subtly denied to me for months. I took the first sip and knew I had made the right decision. The taste of freedom was better than any false comfort. In the following weeks, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I hired a cleaning service to remove every trace of Lillian's presence. I changed the locks, as I had promised. I fully restored my bank account. I decorated my house according to my own taste, my own memories, my own decisions. Camila officially became my best friend. I started taking calls from my cousins in Chicago again. I invited my friends from the book club over again. My house was once again filled with genuine laughter, meaningful conversations, and sincere love. Parker had tried to call me several times in those weeks. He had left crying voicemails, promises of change, pleas for forgiveness, but I had learned to distinguish between sincere remorse and the panic of consequences. On the day the deadline expired, I spent time with Camila. I didn't want to be there when they picked up their things. When I came home that evening, I found the keys on the dining table and a note. "Mom, someday you'll understand that we only wanted what was best for everyone. I hope you're happy in your loneliness." I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. Even in their goodbye, they couldn't take responsibility for their actions. But I was happy. Not in my loneliness, but in my freedom. 6 months later, as I watered the new plants in my yard that I had chosen myself and that pleased me, I heard the doorbell. It was Parker, alone, with a gaunt face and more humble eyes. "Mom," he simply said, "I've come to sincerely apologize, without excuses." I looked at him for a long time. This man, who had been my boy, my life's purpose, my greatest pride, and my greatest disappointment. "What happened to Lillian?" I asked. "She's gone. Turns out, without the easy money and the free house, I wasn't so attractive anymore." I nodded. It didn't surprise me. "And what do you want, Parker?" "I want to ask for your forgiveness. I want the chance to get to know my mother again, to respect her as she deserves." "And what do you offer me in return?" I asked, because I had learned that unconditional love can lead to abuse. "I offer you genuine respect. I offer you my time. I offer you the son you once had, not the selfish stranger I became." "And if I don't forgive you?" I asked, because I needed to know that my forgiveness was not obligatory. "Then I will respect your decision, because I finally understand that respect equals love." Those words, respect equals love, now echoed in my heart like reconciling bells. "You can come in," I finally said, "but with clear conditions. This is still my house, these are still my rules. And if you ever show me disrespect again, there will be no second chance." He nodded, with genuine tears in his eyes. Because in the end, I told him, as I prepared coffee for both of us, it's not the retirement funds or the house that defines you. It's your ability to keep getting up. It's your ability to value yourself enough not to accept crumbs of love. As I poured the coffee into my favorite mugs, which I had kept for months, I knew I had made the right decision. I had not only regained my house and my money, I had regained my dignity, my voice, and my place in the world. And at 69, that was the most precious gift I could give myself. 2 years later, As I drank my morning coffee in the garden I had completely redesigned to my own taste, I reflected on the path I had walked. The hydrangeas named after me bloomed more beautifully than ever, as if they had waited for me to regain my own strength to show theirs. The house had become a home again. A home where laughter was genuine, where conversations had substance, where every corner reflected the personality of its true owner. I had redecorated every room, not on a whim, but as an act of reclamation. Every piece of furniture chosen by me, every color to my taste, every room arranged for my comfort. Camila was still my closest confidant, but she was no longer my only emotional support. My social circle had naturally expanded as I stopped living in shame. My friends from the book club came regularly. My cousins from Chicago visited without anyone having to ask permission. I had even started taking painting classes at the community center and discovered talents I had suppressed for decades. Nora, my painting teacher, had told me last week, "You have a very special perspective on colors. It's as if you've learned to see life in a completely new way." And she was right. I had learned to see life with different eyes. Eyes that no longer constantly sought validation, that were no longer afraid of loneliness, that no longer mistook love for subservience. Parker visited me every Sunday. At first, these visits were tense, filled with uncomfortable silences and superficial conversations. But gradually, we had begun to rebuild a relationship based on mutual respect. He had had to learn to see me as a whole person, not just as mom, the function I had taken on in his life. "You know what surprises me most?" he had asked me during one of our Sunday walks in the park. "It's the discovery that my mother has her own opinions on politics, on art, on life. I never bothered to truly ask you what you thought. Because you never thought my thoughts could be interesting," I had replied honestly, but without bitterness. "To you, I was a function. The one who cooked, the one who cleaned, the one who was always available." He had accepted that truth with humility. "You're right, and I'm embarrassed it took me so long to realize it." These honest conversations were the foundation of our new relationship, a relationship in which I was not just the self-sacrificing mother, but Nora Sawyer, a woman with her own story, her own dreams, her right to prioritize her own joy. The most remarkable change wasn't in my house or in my relationships, but in myself. I looked in the mirror and saw a different woman, not younger. The 71 years were visible on my face, but I was more vibrant. My eyes had a sparkle that had been missing for months. My posture was straighter, my smile more frequent and genuine. I had started to invest time in my self-care. Not to impress anyone, but because I deserved it. I bought clothes I liked. Not just those that were appropriate for my age. I got a modern haircut that shocked some neighbors, but that made me feel renewed. "You look different," the doctor had said at my last checkup. "Have you been exercising?" "I've been exercising my self-esteem," I had replied. And we both laughed, but it was true. Exercising self-esteem was like exercising any other muscle. It required constant practice and led to gradual strengthening. My financial situation had significantly improved. Without Lillian spending my money on frivolous things, without 2 adults to support, my retirement income was not only enough to live comfortably, but also to treat myself to things I had denied myself for years. I had hired a gardener, because I wanted to enjoy the flowers without the hard work. I had bought a new TV for my room, because I wanted to watch my favorite shows without disturbing anyone. I had even started traveling. Small trips, nothing extravagant, but significant for someone who hadn't left town for years. Last month, I had visited my cousin Audrey, whom I had had to receive in the hallway during Lillian's reign. This time, I had stayed for a whole week, slept in the guest room, and was treated like the special guest I deserved to be. "I can't believe you're the same woman I met 2 years ago," Audrey had told me. That Nora was dejected, sad, as if she had given up. This Nora sparkles. And it was true, I had reclaimed my sparkle. Not the sparkle of youth, but something better, the sparkle of authenticity. The nights were no longer synonymous with loneliness and sadness. I had rediscovered the pleasure of my own rituals. The relaxing bath with aromatic salts, undisturbed reading, the music I listened to at full volume whenever I wished. My house had become my sanctuary, not my prison. There were moments, especially on quiet afternoons, when I reflected on the path I had walked. Sometimes I wondered if I had been too harsh, if I had overreacted, but then I remembered how I had felt during those months of humiliation, how I had started to believe that I really was a burden, a nuisance, a presence that had to be tolerated. No, I told myself in those moments of doubt. You put your dignity above false comfort. You put respect above toxic love. Camila was still my moral compass. Nora, she had told me recently, you were an example for all women of our generation. You showed that it's never too late to stand up for what you deserve. Her words filled me with pride, but also with responsibility. I had started to become more active at the community center, sharing my experience with other older women who were going through similar situations, not as a professional counselor, but as someone who had been through the fire and emerged stronger. The most important thing, I told them in these informal meetings, is to remember that true love never demands that you sacrifice your dignity, that true family doesn't demand that you become invisible. Some cases painfully reminded me of my own experience. Women who had relinquished control of their finances to manipulative children. Women who had been convinced they were too old to make their own decisions. Women who had accepted crumbs of affection because they were afraid of being completely alone. Loneliness, I explained to them, is not the worst thing that can happen to you. The worst thing is to live surrounded by people who make you feel alone. My story had become a beacon of hope for many. It showed that it was possible to rebuild a dignified life even in one's golden years, that turning 70 was not synonymous with resignation, that respect could be demanded regardless of age. As I finished my coffee and prepared for another day full of possibilities, I thought of Lillian not with bitterness, but with a strange kind of gratitude. Without her toxic presence, I might never have discovered my own strength. Without her humiliations, I might never have valued my dignity so highly. Without her manipulation, I might never have learned to distinguish between genuine love and emotional blackmail. At 71, I had learned the most important lesson of my life, that self-love is not selfishness but survival, that setting boundaries is not cruelty, but self-care, that choosing dignity over comfort is not arrogance but wisdom. And as the sun warmed my renewed garden, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right decision. Because in the end, no matter how old you are or how many mistakes you've made, it's always the perfect time to start treating yourself with the respect you deserve.